It all started innocently enough. I was cleaning the guest room for my cousin Tyler, who was coming to visit from Florida the following week. The room was on the second floor of the house, next to mine, and hadn't been used in months. A thick layer of dust covered the antique furniture that had belonged to my grandmother. The house in Greenwich Village, New York was old. We had moved here when I was just 10, and now at 27 I knew every corner of the place. Or so I thought. As I wiped down the dark wood nightstand, I noticed something odd. A small hole behind the porcelain lamp. It was almost imperceptible, the kind of detail you only see when you're looking for it. Intrigued, I got closer and followed a thin wire that ran from it, hidden between the baseboard and the wall. My heart raced when I discovered, embedded in the frame of the bookshelf, a tiny black camera. "What the hell is this?" I muttered to myself, a chill running down my spine. Who would install a hidden camera in our guest room? Could it have been the previous owner? That didn't make sense. We had lived in this house for over 15 years. I pulled the small device out and followed the cable along the wall, prying open a small section of the plaster with a screwdriver I found in the desk drawer. The cable snaked through the wall until it reached what appeared to be a hidden compartment under the floorboards of the adjacent closet. I lifted a loose board and found a small metal box with a recording device and a flash drive. The discovery made me dizzy. This was a violation of privacy inside my own home, and it meant someone in the family was involved. My father, Charles, had always been a private man. He worked as a history professor at NYU, methodical and traditional. My mother, Louise, gave piano lessons at home and occasionally at the local music school. My younger sister, Beatrice, was studying medicine upstate in Rochester. We were an ordinary family, with no major secrets, or so I thought. I went back to my room with the flash drive in hand, closed the door and sat down at my computer. I inserted the drive with trembling fingers, not knowing what to expect. Maybe it was just an obsolete security system, some paranoia of my father's about potential break-ins, or perhaps a stupid prank. But something deep down told me there was more to it. Something was deeply wrong. The flash drive contained several folders organized by date. The most recent was from just 2 weeks ago. I clicked on it, and a series of videos appeared on the screen. I took a deep breath before opening the first file. What I saw next would forever change the way I saw my family. The first few videos seemed harmless. They showed distant cousins and family friends who had stayed in the room, casually unpacking, their bags, talking on the phone, sleeping, completely unaware of the camera's presence. A knot formed in my stomach, a feeling of deep unease. It was as if I myself were violating their privacy by watching these images, even though I wasn't the one who had recorded them. My Uncle Nelson and his wife, Aunt Regina, appeared in one video, talking about marital problems no one in the family knew about. Friends of my father from college were filmed in another, arguing heatedly about politics after a barbecue we'd had in the backyard. With each new video, I felt more guilty for intruding on the private moments of people who trusted us. It was when I got to the fourth video that everything changed. The recording was dated about 6 months ago. It showed my father entering the room late at night while everyone was asleep. He didn't turn on the light. He walked directly to the bed, lifted the mattress, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He stood in silence for a moment, as if listening for something. Then he unfolded the paper and began to whisper prayers. But they weren't prayers I recognized from the Catholicism he had always professed. They were frantic, sounded ancient, and were filled with names I had never heard before. I watched, petrified, as my father performed this strange ritual. His expression was one of pure terror, his eyes wide, his hands trembling. He didn't seem like the calm, rational man I knew. In that moment, under the bluish light of the camera, he was a stranger. I continued watching the following videos. My father repeated this ritual weekly, always at night, always alone. In some videos, he brought objects, strange relics wrapped in cloth, a crucifix with markings I couldn't identify, and once even a small vial with a red liquid that made me swallow hard. Each time he would place the item under the bed and kneel beside it, murmuring the same incomprehensible words. I closed the computer after hours of watching those videos. My hands were cold, and my whole body was shaking. I looked out the window. It was already dawn. I needed to sleep, but I knew I wouldn't be able to. Not with those images of my father, that version of him I never knew, burning in my mind. Something was very wrong in this house, and I had to find out what it was. In the days that followed, I couldn't get those images out of my head. My father, always so rational, a respected university professor, author of books on American history, behaving like a religious fanatic in the middle of the night. The man who taught me to question superstitions, to seek evidence before believing in something, was performing secret rituals in our own home. I started paying more attention to his behavior. At breakfast, I watched his hands for signs of tremors. During dinner, I analyzed his face, searching for any hint of that other person I had seen in the videos. But he seemed normal. He discussed literature with my mother, asked about my work at the architecture firm, complained about the traffic on the FDR Drive. He was the same father as always, as far as I could tell. One night, while everyone was asleep, I went back to the videos. There were dozens of them, organized by date, some from years ago. I chose one at random from about 3 years prior. The video showed my father entering the room, but this time he wasn't alone. My mother was with him. They were carrying an old wooden box with carved inscriptions that I couldn't identify. "Are you sure it has to be in here, Charles?" my mother asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It's the only place in the house where its influence doesn't fully reach, Louise," my father replied, placing the box under the bed. "The walls were prepared when we built this wing. My grandfather knew what he was doing." My mother made the sign of the cross and whispered something that sounded like a prayer. "And what if Richard finds out?" she asked, mentioning my name. "He must never know," my father replied firmly. "Neither he nor Beatrice. This is our burden, not theirs." I was paralyzed, so my mother knew too. Whatever the secret was, they were both involved, and they were protecting me. From what? I skipped to more recent videos. In one from just 2 months ago, my father was kneeling by the bed crying. He held an old rosary in his hands and repeated, "He's getting stronger, he's breaking through. Please help me contain him, don't let him reach my son." A chill ran down my spine. Was he talking about me? Who was this he that my father feared so much? In another video, my father took an old book from under the mattress. The pages looked yellowed and fragile. I recognized it immediately. It was a book that was always locked in his office bookshelf, one he never let me touch. "It's just an old family book," he would say when I asked. Now he was flipping through it urgently, stopping at a specific page and reading in a low voice in a language that sounded like Latin, but with words I had never heard before. The more I watched, the more disturbed I became. There were videos of him drawing strange symbols with chalk on the floor under the rug, videos of him placing small sachets of herbs in the corners of the room, and the strangest of all, videos of him talking to the empty air, as if there were someone there that only he could see. In one of the last videos, dated just 3 weeks ago, my father entered the room looking exhausted. He sat on the edge of the bed and spoke directly to the air. "I know you're listening. I know you're trying to reach him through me. But I won't allow it. He will not carry this curse as I have, as my father has, as all the men of the Mendes family have since our ancestor John Peter made that damned pact in Salem. You can destroy me if you want, but he will be free." My jaw dropped. A curse? A pact? Salem? My last name was Mendez, yes, but I had never heard of any John Peter in our lineage, let alone a pact. My father always said our family came from Portugal to America during the colonial era, settling, first in Massachusetts before migrating to New York in the early 20th century. But he never mentioned anything about curses or pacts. In the same video, my father took a small silver locket from his pocket. It looked ancient and had engravings I couldn't make out in the recording. He held it tightly in his closed hand and began to recite, "By the blood that runs in my veins, by the name I carry, by the promise made by my ancestors, I keep you bound. Not through my son, not through Richard. The line ends with me. When he finished. He placed the locket back under the mattress and left the room. The recording continued, showing the empty room for a few minutes until something moved. It was just a shadow, quick and indistinct, but I'm sure of what I saw. A dark shape glided across the wall opposite the bed, as if it were a person but without a definite form. I slammed the laptop shut, a cold sweat running down my back. I looked around my room, suddenly aware of the shadows in the corners, the silence of the old house. Was I becoming paranoid, or was there really something supernatural happening? I spent the next few nights reviewing the videos, trying to find some rational explanation. I searched online for my family history, for unorthodox Catholic rituals, for the name John Peter Mendes. I found a few references to a Portuguese merchant who settled in Salem during the 17th century and made a fortune in trade, but nothing about pacts or curses. On one of my days off, I went to my paternal grandmother's house in Queens. Grandma Eleanor was 92 and her memory often failed her, but maybe she knew something about this family history my father kept secret. She welcomed me joyfully, offering me coffee cake and coffee. We talked about trivial things for a while until I casually mentioned the name John Peter Mendes. Her smile vanished instantly. Her eyes, normally sweet, became hard as stone. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I found it in some research about our family," I lied. "He was an ancestor of ours, wasn't he?" Grandma Eleanor looked around as if checking if anyone was listening, even though we were alone in the house. Then she grabbed my hand with a surprising strength for someone her age. "Never ever repeat that name out loud," she whispered. "Some things from the past should stay, buried, Richard. Your father does what he can to protect you all. Don't interfere." I tried to get her to say more, but she refused. She changed the subject, pretending the conversation had never happened. I left her house more confused than ever, but with one certainty. Whatever was happening, it was real and had affected my family for generations. That night, lying in bed, I made a decision. I had to confront my father. I needed to know the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. For days, I mentally rehearsed how I would approach my father. I wanted to seem calm, rational, exactly as he had always taught me to be. But how do you start a conversation about secret rituals and family curses without sounding like a lunatic? The opportunity arose on a Tuesday. My mother had gone to visit my Aunt Clarice in Boston and wouldn't be back until the next day. Beatrice was still in Rochester, busy with her residency at the medical school. It would be just me and my father at home without interruptions. I made dinner, a simple spaghetti, his favorite dish, and opened a bottle of red wine that we'd been saving for a special occasion. When he arrived from the university, he seemed surprised by the setup. "What's the celebration?" he asked, hanging his coat on the rack by the entrance. "Nothing," I replied casually. "I just thought it would be nice to have dinner together. It's been a while since we've talked, just the two of us." He smiled, but I noticed a shadow of suspicion in his eyes. My father was always perceptive. He probably sensed there was something more behind this impromptu dinner. We sat at the kitchen table and ate in silence for a few minutes. I talked about work, about a restoration project for an old brownstone in the West Village that was giving me a headache. He commented on his students on an article he was writing for an academic journal. Normal, everyday conversation, but my heart was pounding in my chest knowing what was coming next. After the second glass of wine, I took a deep breath and dove right in. "I found a hidden camera in the guest room," I said, watching his reaction closely. For a moment, his face remained impassive, too still. Then slowly he put down his fork. His fingers gripped the utensil so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Where is it?" he asked, his voice controlled but tense. "I've already seen the recordings," I replied, not directly answering his question. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Only the ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator filled the void. My father closed his eyes for an instant, as if preparing himself for something inevitable. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with a deep fatigue, as if he had aged 10 years in that moment. I did it to protect our family. I waited for him to continue, to explain what exactly he was protecting us from, but he just stared at me, his face a mask of exhaustion and resignation. From what, Dad? I pressed. I saw the videos. I saw you performing rituals, talking about curses, about someone trying to reach me. What is going on? He stood up abruptly and walked to the kitchen window. He stood with his back to me, looking out at the dark backyard. You shouldn't have seen that, he murmured. No one should have. But I did, I insisted. And now I need to know the truth. Who is John Peter Mendez? What pact did he make in Salem? And what does it have to do with me? My father turned, his eyes wide. You researched him? He asked, alarmed. Did you say his name out loud? I went to visit Grandma Eleanor, I admitted. I mentioned the name to her. She got scared, said some things from the past should stay buried. My father ran his hands over his face in a gesture of pure desperation. Your grandmother is right, he said, returning to the table and sitting down heavily. There are things it's better not to know, Richard. Things it's better not to disturb. It's too late for that, I argued. I'm already involved. I need to understand what's happening in my own house, in my own family. He studied me for a long moment, as if making a crucial decision. Then, with a deep sigh, he began to speak. John Peter Mendez was my great-great-great-grandfather, a merchant from Lisbon who came to America during the colonial period. He was ambitious, greedy. In Salem, he heard legends of an ancient entity that inhabited the woods, one that the slaves in the shipyards feared more than their masters. They said it could grant wealth and power in exchange for devotion. My father paused, taking a large gulp of wine before continuing. John Peter made a pact with this entity. He offered his devotion, his blood, and in return, he received prosperity. He became one of the wealthiest men in the region. But what he didn't understand was that the pact wasn't just for him. It was for his entire male lineage. When he died, the entity began to demand devotion from his son, then his son's son, and so on. What kind of devotion? I asked, feeling a chill. Rituals, prayers, offerings. The entity feeds on our life force, our strength, and in return it maintains its protection over the family. Those who refused the pact did not meet peaceful ends. I thought of the locket I had seen in the videos, the strange prayers, the objects my father hid under the bed. And this silver locket? My father's eyes widened, surprised that I knew about that too. It's the physical link to the entity, he explained. It was given to John Peter as a symbol of the pact. It contains something of it. As long as the locket exists and is kept by the descendants, the pact continues. If it's destroyed, what happens? No one knows for sure. My uncle Augustus, my father's brother, tried to destroy it in the 70s. He was found in his apartment, in Miami, completely. My father stopped as if the words were stuck in his throat. Completely what? I insisted. Desiccated, he whispered. As if something had sucked all the life out of him. The doctors couldn't explain it. After that, my father redoubled the rituals, fearing for the family. When he died, the responsibility passed to me. I looked at my father, trying to reconcile the rational man I knew with this fantastic story. It was hard to believe. But the images from the videos, the genuine terror in his eyes as he performed those rituals, my grandmother's reaction, everything indicated that, as absurd as it seemed, he believed it deeply. Why the camera? I asked. Why record the rituals? I wasn't the one who installed the camera, he replied, surprising me. It was your grandfather, my father. He believed that if something happened to him, the next guardian, me, would need to know exactly how to perform the rituals. And if something happened to me before I could teach you... Wait, I interrupted, feeling my blood run cold. Are you saying this is going to be passed down to me? That I'll have to continue these rituals? My father looked down, unable to meet my eyes. That's why I never told you. I didn't want this burden for you. I've been trying to find a way to break the pact, to free our family. In recent years, I've discovered ancient texts, consulted people who know about these matters. I thought I was close to a solution. What solution? A severing ritual, something that could release our lineage from the pact without unleashing the entity's wrath. But it's dangerous, Richard. Very dangerous. We were silent for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. The story was fantastical, sounding like something out of a horror movie. But the fear in my father's eyes was real, and something inside me, perhaps the same Mendez blood that ran through his veins, told me this was not delusion or superstition. I need to see the locket, I said finally. My father hesitated, then nodded slowly. Let's go to the guest room, he said, getting up from the table. But I need you to understand something first. Once you see the locket, once you touch it, there's no going back. You become a part of this, part of the pact. The entity will know of you. It will feel your presence. Are you sure you want to continue? I looked into his eyes, the tired eyes of a man who had carried a terrible secret his entire life. A secret that now threatened to fall upon me. I'm sure, I replied, even as my stomach churned with fear. I can't live in ignorance knowing something like this exists in my family. I need to understand. I need to see it with my own eyes. My father nodded, resigned, and together, we went up the stairs toward the guest room, toward a family secret that was about to change my life forever. The guest room felt different now that I knew its secret. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, the air heavier. My father walked to the bed and, without hesitation, lifted the mattress. In the space between the bed slats there was a dark wooden box, carved with symbols that looked like a mixture of Catholic crosses and something older, more primitive. This box belonged to John Peter, my father explained, picking it up carefully. It's made from New England maple, consecrated by a spiritualist from Old Salem. He placed the box on the dresser and took out a small key he wore on a chain hidden under his shirt. The lock on the box opened with a metallic click. Inside, on a faded red velvet cloth, lay the locket. It was larger than I had imagined, about the size of a $50 coin. Ancient silver, blackened by time, with intricate engravings that seemed to shift subtly as the light hit them. In the center, there was a figure I couldn't quite decipher. It looked like a face, but distorted, as if in constant motion beneath the metal. May I asked, extending my hand. My father hesitated, then nodded. Remember what I said. Once you touch it. I know, I replied and picked up the locket. The metal was cold, much colder than it should have been on a warm February night. A strange tingling sensation ran up my arm, like tiny electric needles under my skin. For a moment, I had the distinct feeling that the locket was aware of me, that something inside it was watching me, assessing me. You feel it, don't you? My father asked, watching my reaction. That's how it begins. The connection. I quickly returned the locket to the box, disturbed by the sensation. My father closed it and locked it again. Now I need to tell you the whole story, he said, putting the box back under the mattress. Sit down. This is going to be a long night. We sat in the chairs by the window. Outside, the New York night pulsed with distant lights, occasional sirens, the constant roar of the city that never completely sleeps. Inside, we were about to delve into a story older than the concrete and asphalt that surrounded us. John Peter Mendez was no ordinary man, my father began. He came from a poor family in Lisbon, determined to make his fortune in America. When he arrived in Salem in 1682, the witch trials were just a decade away, and the town was a hotbed of superstition and fear. But John Peter was stubborn. My father stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulling out an old leather-bound book I recognized from the videos. "This is his journal," he explained, opening it carefully. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting elaborate and difficult to decipher. He describes how he heard stories about an entity in the woods, a being the local tribes avoided and the colonists feared. The English called it the Master of the Deeps, but it had other names in other languages. My father turned a few pages and showed me a drawing, a black figure with eyes that looked like empty holes in the paper, surrounded by symbols similar to those carved on the wooden box. John Peter was desperate. He had spent all his money on trade goods and ship charters, without enough return. That's when he decided to seek out this being to make an offer. The journal describes the ritual he performed in a cave near Salem, using animal blood and his own blood. My father paused, closing the book. The pact was simple: prosperity for John Peter and his descendants in exchange for devotion. The Master of the Deeps gave him the locket as a symbol of the agreement. 3 days later, one of John Peter's ships, thought lost at sea, arrived in port laden with valuable spices. Within a year, he became one of the wealthiest men in the region. And the price, I asked. Weekly rituals, specific prayers, offerings of blood, animal, most of the time. The locket needed to be fed, as he wrote, but what John Peter didn't understand was the nature of the pact. It wasn't just for his lifetime, it was perpetual, passing to the firstborn son of each generation. When he died, his son began to have terrible nightmares. He dreamed of the same figure from the journal, demanding he continue the rituals. And if he refused? John Peter Jr. tried. For 6 months he ignored the dreams, hid the locket. Then his pregnant wife began to waste away with no medical explanation. She only improved when he resumed the rituals. He then realized he was trapped. The pattern repeated for generations, my father explained. Some accepted the burden reluctantly, others tried to escape. My great-grandfather, Anthony Mendez, moved to New York, trying to leave the past in Massachusetts, but the nightmares followed him. His younger brother, who mocked the family superstition, died in an unexplained fire. My grandfather, your great-grandfather Gerald, was the first to systematically document the rituals, my father continued. He was a history professor like me and tried to find an academic, rational explanation for what was happening to us. He studied Native American religions, African rituals, European occultism. He concluded that what we call the Master of the Deeps is an ancient entity that existed in America long before the Europeans, something the native tribes already knew and avoided. And this entity still exists? It's still linked to the locket? Yes, my father answered in a grave voice. It's weaker now. Time and the distance from Salem have diluted its influence somewhat. But it's still there, and it still demands its tribute. A question occurred to me, something I had never considered before. And our prosperity? The other side of the pact? Our family is comfortable, but we're not exactly rich. My father smiled sadly. Each generation interpreted prosperity differently. John Peter wanted gold. His son wanted political power. My grandfather wanted knowledge. And he hesitated. I asked for protection for you and your sister, that you would have long and healthy lives. I felt a lump in my throat. The idea that my father had spent decades performing secret rituals, dealing with something potentially dangerous, all to protect me, was overwhelming. Why did you never tell me? I asked, my voice choked with emotion. Why carry this burden, alone? I wanted you to have a normal life, Richard, not to grow up with this fear, this responsibility. Your mother and I decided we would only tell you if it was absolutely necessary, and frankly, I was hoping to find a solution before then. The solution you mentioned before? The severing ritual? Yes. In recent years, I've researched intensely. I've contacted experts, discreetly, of course. An anthropology professor at Brown who studies colonial-era religions, an Italian priest who specializes in cases of possession, an old woman in rural Massachusetts who is a descendant of the Wampanoag tribe from John Peter's time. And they believed you? I asked, skeptical. I didn't tell anyone the whole story, just fragments presented as academic research or historical curiosity. But I gathered valuable information, and finally, about a year ago, I found something promising. My father took a folder that was hidden behind the books on the shelf. Inside were photocopies of old documents, notes in his meticulous handwriting, and drawings similar to those in John Peters' journal. A liberation ritual, he explained, something that could break the bond with the entity without unleashing its wrath. But it's risky, very risky, and it requires a sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? I asked, alarmed. My father looked away. The current bearer of the locket must offer something of equivalent value to the prosperity received. In my case, well, it's complicated, and that's why I've been hesitant. Before I could ask more, a noise at the window startled us. A branch tapping against the glass, just that. But my father's face was tense, vigilant. "It knows we're talking about this," he said softly. "It always knows." At that moment, looking at my father's worried face, at the shadows that seemed to subtly move in the corners of the room, I knew my life would never be the same. The normal, rational, orderly world I knew had just gained a deeper, older, and much more frightening layer. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything my father had told me. Part of me, the rational, skeptical part raised on science books and Discovery Channel documentaries, insisted it was absurd. Family curses, supernatural entities, magic lockets. It was the plot of a B-horror movie, not something that happened to real families in New York in the 21st century. But another part of me, a deeper, more instinctual part, knew it was true. The terror in my father's eyes was genuine. The supernatural coldness of the locket against my skin had been real. And that unsettling feeling of being watched, assessed by something invisible, was not imagination. Finally, around 4 in the morning, I fell into a restless sleep. I dreamed of a dark cave in the woods of Massachusetts. A man who vaguely resembled me but dressed in 17th century clothes knelt before a darkness that seemed deeper than the night itself. From the darkness, lidless eyes watched. A soundless voice promised riches and power. And blood, the man cutting, his own palm letting drops fall onto a newly forged silver locket. I woke with a start to the sound of my cell phone. It was my alarm, 7:30 a.m. I had to get ready for work, face another normal day at the architecture firm, as if the world hadn't turned upside down the night before. In the bathroom, while brushing my teeth, I noticed something strange in the mirror. For an instant, it seemed like there was someone behind me, just a shadow in my peripheral vision. I turned quickly, but the bathroom was empty. I looked back at the mirror and almost dropped my toothbrush. My eyes, for a second, they looked different, darker, older. "It's just fatigue," I muttered to myself. "Just stress and lack of sleep." At breakfast, my father acted surprisingly normal, commenting on the traffic and the weather forecast as if we hadn't spent hours discussing demonic pacts the night before. Only as I was leaving, he put his hand on my shoulder and said in a low voice, "Be careful today. Be aware of changes, and come straight home after work. We need to continue our conversation." On the subway, on the crowded yellow line, I felt claustrophobic. The people pressed against each other, the noise, the heat, everything seemed amplified, unbearable. And there was something else, a feeling that someone was watching me intently. I looked around, but I only saw the tired faces of New Yorkers on their way to work, all avoiding eye contact as usual. At the office, I had trouble concentrating. I was working on the restoration project of the brownstone in the West Village, a beautiful example of early 20th century Italianate architecture. Normally, I would lose myself in these details, in the building's history, in the challenges of preserving its essence while modernizing it. Today, however, the lines in AutoCAD seemed to move on their own. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper than usual. During lunch with colleagues at a deli on 6th Avenue, one of them commented, Are you okay, Richard? You look pale. Just a bad night's sleep, I replied automatically. Your eyes are kind of strange, he insisted, frowning. I took out my phone and used the front camera as a mirror. My eyes looked normal now, but there were deep, dark circles that hadn't been there in the morning. In the afternoon, things got worse. Cold spots in the office, as if walking through pockets of frigid air. The computer crashing without explanation, files mysteriously corrupting. And the most disturbing, when I went to the bathroom and washed my hands, the water in the drain seemed for an instant dark as ink. I blinked, and it was normal water again. I left early, unable to continue feigning normalcy. On the subway, back sitting alone in the last car, I had the distinct impression that someone had sat down next to me, even though the seat was empty. A cold, heavy presence that smelled of wet earth and metal. At home, I found my father in his office, surrounded by old books. He looked at me with concern. "Something happened today, didn't it?" he asked without preamble. I told him about the sensations, the anomalies, the shadows. He nodded gravely. "It started faster than I feared. The locket. It has recognized you as the next in line, and it's curious about you." It? The master of the deeps, the entity. It's trying to familiarize itself with you, to understand what kind of person you are, what you value, what you fear. A shiver ran down my spine. What can I do? For now, stay close to me. Don't be alone, especially at night, and don't try to deny what's happening. That only strengthens it. In the following weeks, the occurrences continued, gradually increasing in intensity. The cold spots in the house became more frequent. Objects moved when no one was looking. The sound of footsteps on the stairs at night, even though everyone was in bed. My mother returned from Boston, and I realized she knew much more than she let on. She avoided certain rooms in the house, especially the guest room. She kept discreet crucifixes in almost every room. And occasionally, when she thought no one was looking, she made protective gestures, not just the Catholic sign of the cross, but other movements that seemed older, perhaps learned from her Portuguese grandmother. One night I woke up thirsty and went down to the kitchen for water. In the dark hallway I saw a figure. For a terrifying moment I thought it was the entity, the shadowy form from my nightmares. But it was my mother, standing motionless, staring at the wall as if she saw something there that I couldn't. "Mom?" I called softly. She turned, startled. Her eyes were wide, vigilant. "Richard," she whispered, "go back to bed. Don't wander around the house at night." "What are you doing here?" She hesitated, then replied in a low voice. "Monitoring. It's more active lately, more restless. Can you see it?" "Not exactly, but I can feel when it's near. My grandmother taught me how." The next day, something happened that I could no longer rationalize or ignore. I was in my room working on some sketches for the brownstone project when I heard a strange sound coming from the wall, like nails slowly scratching the plaster. I approached, curious and apprehensive. As I watched, scratches began to appear on the wallpaper, slowly forming a symbol. The same symbol I had seen on the strange crucifix my father hid under the guest room bed. I ran to call my father. When we returned, the symbol was complete. A spiral, surrounded by lines that looked like rays, and in the center, something resembling an eye. "It's his mark," my father explained, his voice trembling. "He's claiming you." That night, he took me to the guest room again. He removed the wooden box from under the mattress and opened it. The locket seemed to pulse gently in the darkness, emitting a faint glow that wasn't reflected from any visible light source. "This is what binds us to it," my father said, picking up the locket. "And it's weakening." He explained that the rituals were no longer working as they used to. That something had changed the moment I discovered the camera, as if the secret no longer wanted to stay hidden. "I think it's time," he said finally. Time to try the severing ritual, before it gets stronger, before it gets closer to you. What's the risk? If we fail, if the ritual isn't complete or is interrupted, it could escape the locket completely. And then, nothing would stop it from fully manifesting in our world. And what would happen then? My father looked at me with somber eyes. John Peters' journal mentions that the entity had another name among the native tribes. They called it the Devourer of Souls. I think that answers your question. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the decision. When do we do this? It has to be on the new moon, 3 days from today. I'll arrange everything, get the necessary materials. Your mother will take Beatrice to visit her aunt in Boston again. The fewer people in the house, the better. When I left the guest room that night, a feeling of being followed accompanied me to my own room. I locked the door, a useless precaution against something that seemed to be able to pass through walls. Lying in bed, looking at the shadows on the ceiling, I was absolutely certain that we were no longer alone in that house. The entity was becoming more present, more attentive. It was as if the veil between its world and ours was growing thinner with each passing hour. And in 3 days, my father and I would try to banish it forever, or risk unleashing it completely. The 3 days that followed were a nightmare of preparations and escalating manifestations. My father took a leave of absence from the university, citing health problems. I took a few days off from the office, faking a bad flu. We needed to focus entirely on the ritual, and more importantly, we needed to stay together. The entity's presence became more intense when we were apart. My mother left with Beatrice for Boston the next morning. Before she left, she hugged me with unusual force. "Trust your father," she whispered. "He's been researching this for years. If anyone can end this, it's him." In her eyes, I saw that she wasn't sure if she would see us again. The possibility of failure hung over us all like a dark cloud. With the house to ourselves, we began the preparations. My father had gathered strange and diverse objects. Coarse salt from a specific salt flat in the Hamptons, handmade candles from a woman in Salem who claimed to be a descendant of African slaves, dried herbs that smelled of deep woods, an ancient dagger with a bone handle that had belonged to John Peter Mendez himself, and most disturbingly, a vial of animal blood obtained from a butcher shop in the Bronx. The ritual must mirror the original pact, he explained, as we transformed the guest room into something that looked like a horror movie set. John Peter used blood to seal the deal. We need blood to break it. We drew complex symbols on the floor with white chalk and charcoal. We positioned candles at specific points, forming a 5-pointed star. In the center, we placed a handmade ceramic bowl where the locket would rest during the ritual. "When the new moon is at its highest point tonight, we will begin," my father said, consulting an old astrology book. The exact time is 1:47 a.m. As we waited, the house seemed to grow more alive around us. Unexplained creaks echoed in the walls. The air alternately turned icy cold and suffocatingly hot. Light bulbs flickered for no reason. The living room TV turned on by itself 3 times, always to the same static channel. "It knows," I commented, nervously watching the shadows that seemed to lengthen in the corners of the room. "It knows what we're planning." "Yes," my father nodded gravely. "And it will do everything to stop us." Around 11 at night, the activity intensified dramatically. Pictures fell from the walls. A chair in the kitchen tipped over on its own. A strong smell of wet earth and metal filled the house. And most alarmingly, we began to hear whispers, incomprehensible words murmured in empty corners. My father picked up the locket, which seemed to pulse with more force now, and held it tightly. "Don't let it affect you," he instructed. "It will. Try to scare you, confuse you, even try to possess one of us if it can. Keep your mind clear, focus on the goal." At midnight, we prepared a simple meal, bread and wine like in Catholic communion, but my father added a few drops of a dark liquid from an old vial. "To strengthen our spirits," he explained. a recipe I learned from a spiritualist in New Orleans. We ate in silence, as the house seemed to breathe around us. More and more I had the feeling of being watched by many invisible eyes. The shadows in the corners seemed to have depth, as if you could dive into them and fall forever. At 1:30 a.m., we entered the guest room. The temperature had dropped drastically. Our breath formed clouds of condensation in the air. We put on simple white cotton robes that my father had prepared, each marked with protective symbols in red ink. "Once we begin, we cannot stop," he warned, lighting the candles one by one. "No matter what happens, no matter what we see or hear, the ritual must be completed." I nodded, trying to control the tremor in my hands. My father placed the locket in the bowl at the center of the chalk circle. We positioned ourselves facing each other, each at a point of the star drawn on the floor. He began to recite words in Latin, mixed with terms in Algonquian and what sounded like Yoruba, an invocation that blended the traditions that met in colonial America, just as the pact itself had been a terrible fusion of worlds. The candle flames grew, becoming strangely tall and intense. The locket in the bowl began to spin slowly, as if in water, though the bowl was dry. Following my father's instructions, I took the ancient dagger and made a small cut on the palm of my hand. I let a few drops of blood fall onto the locket. My father did the same. Our blood, the blood of the Mendes, touched the metal and seemed to be absorbed by it. By the blood that binds us, by the pain that unites us, we break the pact made by John Peter Mendez, we recited together. That's when the real horror began. A wind from nowhere swept through the room, nearly extinguishing the candles. The walls seemed to ripple as if they were liquid. And a voice that was not human, that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, began to speak in an ancient language that somehow we could understand. "You invite me only to banish me? You feed me only to deny me?" There. Temperature plummeted further. My breath came out in dense clouds of vapor. The locket in the bowl began to glow with a sickly, greenish light. "Continue, Richard," my father shouted over the howling wind. "Don't stop. Don't hesitate." We continued the ritual, pouring salt around the bowl, adding the herbs which began to spontaneously combust, releasing a dense, aromatic smoke. We recited the names of all the Mendez men who had carried the burden of the pact, from John Peter to my father. The entity became more aggressive. Objects began to fly around the room. Books, chairs, even the heavy wooden dresser levitated a few inches off the floor. An invisible force pushed me, trying to knock me out of the protective circle, but I managed to resist. My father's face was tense with concentration as he continued to recite the ritual words. Blood began to trickle from his nose, but he didn't stop. His eyes were fixed on the locket, which was now spinning furiously in the bowl, emanating an increasingly intense light. Then came the hardest part of the ritual, the sacrifice. "Charles Edward Mendez, current bearer of the pact," my father declared in a loud, clear voice. "I offer in sacrifice the protection I asked for my children. I remove the shield I placed over them, so they may face the world on their own merits, by their own strength. This is my sacrifice. This is my offering to break the pact." An inhuman scream echoed through the entire house, making the windows tremble. The locket levitated above the bowl, spinning faster and faster, the light emanating from it becoming almost unbearable to look at. "Richard Mendez," my father turned to me. "Do you accept to live without the protection of the pact? Do you accept to face the world as a mortal man without the blessings or curses of your ancestors?" "I accept," I shouted over the chaos. "Then it is done." My father snatched the locket from the air, ignoring the heat that seared his skin. With a swift movement, he struck it against the edge of the bowl. The ancient metal, which had withstood centuries, cracked in half with a sharp sound like a scream. A blinding light exploded from the broken locket. The sensation was of a bomb detonating, a pressure wave that threw us against the walls. For a moment I saw it, The entity, the master of the deeps, the devourer of souls. A dark form larger than the room with eyes like bottomless pits and a mouth that could swallow worlds. For a terrible instant I thought we had failed, that we had unleashed it completely. But then, the light transformed into a vortex, a whirlpool of energy that seemed to suck the darkness from the figure. The entity screamed, a sound that shook the foundations of the house. And then, with a silent implosion, it was all over. Absolute silence. The candles extinguished. The room in complete darkness. "Dad?" I called, my voice trembling. A faint groan came from the other side of the room. I fumbled in the dark, until I found my phone on the floor and turned on the flashlight. My father was slumped against the wall, pale, exhausted, but alive. In his burned hand, the fragments of the broken locket. "Did we do it?" I asked, helping him to sit up. He nodded slowly. "It's done. The pact is broken." The next morning, we buried the fragments of the locket in separate places. One part in a cemetery in Brooklyn, another in Central Park, and the third was thrown into the Hudson River. My father insisted we should disperse them as much as possible, so they could never be reunited. In the days that followed, the house felt lighter, brighter. The shadows were just shadows again. There were no more cold spots, no whispers, no oppressive feeling of being watched. My mother and Beatrice returned, and gradually, we resumed a semblance of normalcy. But something in me had changed permanently. I had seen beyond the veil of ordinary reality. I had faced something ancient and terrible. The world would never look the same. A few nights later, I found my father on the terrace looking at the stars. The burns on his hand were healing slowly. "How long do you think it will last?" I asked. He immediately understood what I meant. "I don't know. No Mendez has ever gotten this far before. Maybe forever. Maybe just until someone finds the fragments and puts them back together. Or maybe what? Maybe it will find another desperate family, another John Peter willing to make a pact for prosperity. Entities like that, they are patient. They have all the time in the world." We stood in silence for a moment, contemplating this unsettling possibility. "I still have the camera, you know," I confessed finally. "Hidden in my drawer, just in case." My father smiled faintly. "Smart, I'd do the same." We looked together at the New York sky, partially obscured by light pollution but still dotted with stars. Somewhere out there, other families carried their own secrets, their own curses. And while our particular story had found its end, I couldn't help but wonder how many other similar stories were unfolding at this very moment, under the same starry sky.